Hi, this is the story of my 400-day clock. So this is a clock that I bought on eBay something like 20 years ago already, and it was a non-working clock. It was very tarnished at the bottom, very dark brown at the bottom, looking ugly. It had a broken plexiglass dome, not the original glass dome. It had a damaged suspension spring that could not be used anymore. It was bent and nicked and whatnot. It did not have a key to wind up the clock. So this is how I bought it on eBay, knowing that, it was very not nice clock, but, trying to fix all this. That was the plan. And then very soon I lost patience and whatnot doing that, and recently I picked it up again, the clock and everything. What I did buy shortly after the clock was a set of rollover suspension springs. This was a set of 12 springs. I did not know what spring to use at that time, so I bought a set that had 12 different ones, thinking there must be some spring in this suspension spring that fits the clock that I have here. And then after trying a little bit this and that, I installed a suspension spring of 0.0023 inch and tried it with that spring. That actually worked not too bad. What I had to do was install that spring, the 23 spring as I call it, and then I have to think about, at that time I didn't know all the details yet, but basically I had to do the beat setting on that clock. That meant that I had to make sure that the tick and the tock of the clock was sort of equal. So trying to explain here the beat setting that has to happen at that point. Basically what these 400-day clocks have is a suspension bracket, and the whole unit of suspension spring is hanging on that suspension bracket. That suspension bracket can be moved left and right, and with that moving left and right, you move the range of where the clock is going with the swing left and right. And with that, you determine the tick and the tock, the left and the right, and where the anchor with the pellets is getting off the wheel and has a little bit of a range on the left and a little bit of a range on the right. That is a little bit of overswing if you want. And if you have that properly, then the clock is in beat, it is running, and it is running, it keeps running when you have it like that. If you have either the left or the right bigger than the other one, you might run out of space and the clock stops after sometimes 15 minutes, sometimes more, sometimes less, but it is not running. So you have to set that suspension bracket sort of in the middle, and then it is running. And I got that with the 23 eventually. I had that running for a long time, and then I found that it's kind of running slow, actually very slow. The thing was, if you have a suspension spring that is way thinner than what you need, the swing is going to be bigger than what you need. And when the swing is bigger, it takes more time. And that reflects into clock running slow. So that's what I had without knowing all the details, because I didn't have any book yet. And so that I had the clock working. The big benefit for me was that at that time I knew that the whole mechanism of the clock was working properly. So at that point I also bought a new dome, a glass dome, and thinking that okay, now the clock is running, I can get it better, I can improve stuff, but at least now I can invest into a dome and things like that. I also bought a key at a certain point, a new key. But really, at this point, I wanted to know what is the manufacturer and what is the age of the clock. So to figure out the manufacturer and the age of the clock, I bought the Jahresuhrenfabrik 400-day clock repair guide. That repair guide is the best investment that I made when I wanted to, work on 400-day clocks. And this was just one example, but maybe I do more clocks in the future. This was my first clock. So basically what this book has is a lot of tips, of course, but it explains with sort of drawings of the back plate of the clock, and then it shows what is the manufacturer of the clock, when was it made, and for me that was what I show is page 169. My clock was made by Jahresuhrenfabrik, that is translated into year clock factory. It was made roughly, I would say, after 1900, because it has a 6-pillar gallery on top of the suspension, on top of the pendulum, and then it is made before 1905, because at that point they were using 4-ball pendulums and not a disc pendulum anymore. So basically my clock is from somewhere between 1900 and 1905, all coming from this book explained on page 169. Also on page 169 it's explained that the suspension spring that need to be used for this is the suspension spring 6789A, and it is using the Jahresuhrenfabrik suspension spring 0.0040. They actually sell this whole unit with the top block and the bottom block and the fork properly installed in the proper place, and that's what I ended up buying, because the one unit that I had, the screws were worn and it was very difficult to install a suspension spring properly and so on. So I ended up buying the 6789A suspension spring unit. When I got that, I'm showing on page 180 in the book. It was exactly how it was pictured in the book, this whole suspension spring. This was a very good thing to do, because now eventually I actually did not have to change anything on this spring unit, this suspension spring unit. I installed it as it came from the Jahresuhrenfabrik factory or whatever they have, their shop, and it was exactly spot on, no changes necessary. Now what I found was that the 0040, of course it's thicker than the 23, and therefore the swing is less than the 23. That swing is so much less that it is just enough to get your tick and tock, the left and the right swing proper. You basically not have an overswing at all on the left side and the right side. A very small margin, very, very small, and very difficult therefore to get it running. But I got it running. I mean, I just sit there and watch what is happening and check and move it left and move it right and move it left and move it right until finally I got that sweet spot that the clock was working properly. Very satisfying to have the clock working with the proper suspension spring, and you know, the time had to be adjusted, but basically the clock was working at that. So now that the clock was working, I started doing the next steps on cleaning the base of the clock. Initially I had already cleaned the base with a stainless steel brush, sort of big step for me to do that, but you know, it had to be clean because it was so dirty, and it had to be, you know, sort of a way to get that brown tarnish off the base. So I used a stainless steel brush and brushed all that off, and it looked okay, but not perfect, of course. So then I went on to clean the base more, and I did 3 more steps in here. The first step was to use sandpaper grade 400, and I used a dry sandpaper and sanded down that whole base. Then I used 1000, and I used it wet with water and sanded down again to make it very, very nice, with no scratches, trying to. So that is 2 cycles of sandpaper, 400 dry and 1000 wet. And then I applied a layer sort of the flitz polish, and then I used my tool, my Dremel tool with a wool polish wheel, and polished the base where I had that flitz polish applied, sort of polished it off with that tool. And this is a fast turning tool, 29,000 or 30,000 sort of turns per whatever minute or second or whatever. No, that's per minute. And you have to wear safety glass because it was sprinkling that polish around everywhere. So very careful when you do something like that. But the bottom line was that when I was finished with that tool, with that wool polish wheel, the base of the clock was shiny, very shiny finish, that exactly what I wanted. It was like so nice. They must have had the same when they made it as new, or made it new in the beginning in the factory. They must have done something similar. So I have a few pictures here of the sandpaper 400 and 1000 and the flitz polish. So the flitz polish worked really well. You can use that and it will work properly, no problems at all. So the remaining thing is now I need to adjust the time. It's running a little bit fast, and there is room for adjustment on the wheel. On the pendulum, on top of the pendulum is the 2 little screws, the 2 little weights. If you screw it out, the clock will work slower, and that is, you know, everything is possible and okay there. Next, I am going to show the working clock video. So here you can see the video of the clock as it is sort of finished, except for a little bit of a time difference that I need to, the speed of the time that I need to adjust a little bit, but everything is working fine, everything has been cleaned fine, and everything is working okay. So you can see that the clock is a little bit of a time difference between the reel. That's what I'm talking about. It runs a little bit fast, but for the rest everything is working just nice. So here you have my story. This is the clock working. Everything is working fine. Everything is cleaned properly as far as I want to clean now. There is a little bit more cleaning that could be done later, but I'm so happy that the clock is working and running that I'm gonna stop here and gonna leave it here. So thank you for your viewing, and if you have any questions, please contact me or comments or whatnot. Thank you. Bye.